It's tough in this day and age. If you're trying to take COVID seriously, if you're trying to protect yourself from like a BSL-3 level pathogen, it's a dangerous disease that causes long-term disability for many, many people. And if you've already had COVID, there's like, I think like a 10% chance or something that you have some kind of form of long COVID, whether that's, exhaustion that won't go away, whether that's like a cough that won't go away. Millions of people are affected by this. And it's tough navigating being in society. It's tough navigating medical care. If you're vulnerable and masks aren't required at the office, at the doctor's office, people keep telling me I need to be responsible for my own health, but I can't go to the doctor without risking catching COVID. So what am I supposed to do? All these situations are especially trying for the disabled, the vulnerable, for anyone who's trying to protect themselves. It's also really hard to navigate interpersonal relationships, including like marriages. And we're going to be reading an article today about this because I've personally seen mostly the perspective of disabled people who are living with folks who aren't taking the same precautions, talking about how they're trying to keep themselves safe. Like they still live with their parents and their parents brought home COVID. And so, of course the parents aren't wearing masks in the house. They're going into the kitchen doing whatever. And so the person who's trying not to get sick is like, oh, well, I guess I just have to stay in my room and wear a mask and only go to the bathroom when I absolutely need to and keep my food in my bedroom. But today we're going to be looking at the perspective of the person who isn't too worried about COVID anymore, whose partner has, I believe, long COVID and is still worried about catching COVID. So this is an article titled, "Wrestling with My Husband's Fear of Getting COVID Again." In 2022, while I was 7 months pregnant, my husband and I got COVID. While it was a mild case for me, he had scary lingering symptoms. He said it felt like there was an engine humming in his chest. He experienced frightening fits of insomnia. And his personality changed. My normally upbeat husband became uncharacteristically depressed. After a few months, his symptoms went away, but his fears of getting COVID didn't. He is immunocompromised, and his doctors warned him that if he got sick again, it may complicate his autoimmune disease. Plus, he didn't want to repeat his traumatic ordeal, especially with a baby on the way. Girl, you're lucky that your baby didn't die, because COVID will destroy the placenta. It's very serious. Meanwhile, I once had to drive one state over to pick up my mom from a place with a COVID outbreak. She had it and was in the car with me for 5 or 6 hours, but I didn't contract it. If I did, it was asymptomatic. Yeah, 23% of cases are fully asymptomatic. Like 24% of cases are fully asymptomatic. So yeah, but that doesn't mean that you won't still end up with heart scarring later. That's the tricky thing about it. You could have a totally asymptomatic case and still end up with long-term complications. There are more reasons to be anxious. State and national measures to prevent COVID are falling away. Like most recently, the CDC dropped the 5-day isolation guidance. Yeah, that was great. And the disease is still very much a threat. This feels like lip service. Yes, vaccines and boosters can protect against severe illness, but vulnerable people like my husband are still at high risk. To top it off, there's still a lot we don't know about the coronavirus. There's emerging evidence that the neurological symptoms of COVID can persist years after an infection. Yeah, speaking of you, having mood disturbances for a few months afterwards. And yes, it is very likely to mess up your heart. You have an increased risk of blood clot, stroke, and heart attack for 12 months after you catch COVID. My doctor recently said it's only 6 months after you catch COVID, which I still felt like I kind of wanted to be like, hey man, you know how people are catching COVID more than twice a year? Which means you just always have an elevated and compounding risk of heart attack and stroke. But yeah, heart scarring has been seen in patients that did not have symptoms during their original acute infection. If you're enjoying this video, hit the like button, maybe subscribe, hit all notifications if you want. Feel free to check out the links in the description. You might find some merch you like, or you can hit up the Patreon to support the content and find free stuff. People are so dumb that they have worse hygiene than before. Listen, are they dumb or are their brains being changed by a virus in order to make it easier to spread? Some people I know had lung damage from COVID. Yeah, interestingly, I don't know if any of you know Merrick DeVille, but she's a streamer and a sex worker. And I remember her saying that after one of her COVID infections, she was coughing up blood and couldn't really handle stairs. And I recently have seen pictures of her out at bars and I'm like, what the is wrong with you? Genuinely, if you were coughing up blood and couldn't do stairs after a previous COVID infection, why are you out raw dogging the air in a bar? I can't imagine coughing up blood and then being like, yeah, let me do that again. I become very critical of people when they're not taking precautions, by the way, especially if you're on Twitter and you have access to the same information that I do. It's a horror movie disease. I guess that's fair. So, while the rest of the world seems to have moved on from the pandemic, in our house, it is still 2020. We wear masks when we go into public indoor spaces. We don't eat inside restaurants. We don't go to movies. We have people take COVID tests before they enter our house. All this leaves me feeling torn between two emotions. I want to keep my husband safe and healthy, but I also want our old life back. This is someone who just doesn't understand that she's just as at risk as her husband is. You want your old life back? Okay, well, if you start acting like that, then what you're going to end up with is your own autoimmune disease. If we cannot trust the CDC, then who can we trust? Here's the thing, you absolutely should never trust the CDC. They are a political organization, not a scientific organization. The CDC said, HIV is not that big of a deal. We don't even need to bother studying it. It's not, it doesn't accelerate into a problem within the first 5 years. Therefore, it's not a problem. You develop AIDS after about 12 years with untreated HIV. So yeah, the CDC is not like a trustworthy organization. They give guidance under the direction of like the president and fucking Delta Airlines. If we just had healthy plague procedures by default, then none of this stuff would happen. Yeah, why wasn't it normalized already in our country to wear a mask if you have symptoms? Like, we're at a point now where people actively have symptoms during a time of the year that it does not make sense to have allergies. Like, why are people in the winter saying, oh, it's my allergies? No, bro, probably not. I mean, maybe. Or do you live in the South? Because sure. But otherwise, you should take a goddamn test. And then also you should take like several tests. They are increasingly not going to catch the newer variants that are changing. It's harder and harder to detect. Of course it is. It is pretty alarming that anti-vax was considered lunacy not even a decade ago, and now it is a dominant school of thought. I honestly, yeah, would today's skepticism toward the COVID virus vaccine, like, would that be there if it wasn't for the fact that we did have 10 years of lead up of increasing skepticism and, ooh, but I've decided that I want to do my vaccines on a different timeline. I still have never got coronavirus. Listen, babes, you definitely almost certainly have. At this point, there's like almost a 0% chance that you've never had coronavirus. 23% of cases are completely asymptomatic unless you've had the blood test. And even then, like, I don't know if you had COVID 4 years ago, I don't know if the blood test would still show antibodies from that. I'm not sure what exactly the blood test is though. So, but yeah, there's basically no chance that you haven't caught it by now. Rapid tests are not super reliable because low viral load usually shows as negative. Right. Plenty of people have reported that they don't start testing positive for COVID until the 4th day of their symptoms. And so they've been sick, they've had COVID, they've been able to transmit it, but it just hasn't been showing up on the test because their viral load was not quite enough to show up on the test. Which means, I guess, if their viral load was low, then they weren't spreading it a lot, but they're still spreading it. Okay, let's keep reading. A family problem. It feels selfish and trivial to say that amid my husband's plight. He is terrified that if he gets COVID again, it will be as harrowing as the first time, and it could trigger a flare-up of his chronic illness. I mean, yeah, every time you catch COVID, it like decreases your immune response for next time. So it's more likely that subsequent infections will be more severe in some cases. I guess it depends on how soon after you get the other one, because like your antibodies do wear off after a certain time. But yeah, if your system is not able to create antibodies, then previous infections are not helping you, which is why people are getting sick like every month now. Let's see. My feelings as his spouse are valid too. God, says James C. Jackson, a neuropsychologist at Vanderbilt University. There's this sentiment that if spouses of those who have experienced long COVID complain, they're, quote, missing the real victim, says Jackson. But that's problematic from so many standpoints. For one, it fails to recognize that long COVID is a family problem. Jackson has seen how one partner's experience with a traumatic bout of how one partner's experience with a traumatic bout of COVID can affect the other partner firsthand. Every other week, Jackson meets with a support group for family members of people who were critically ill with COVID. Many of the participants are women who are, quote, having to negotiate their husband's fears of socializing, traveling, or even going to the doctor, he says. Wow. This seems like it's the opposite of what it should be, because women are more likely to get long COVID than men are. And like, I frequently see pictures of couples walking around in public and the woman is wearing a mask and the man isn't. So I'm already immediately like, this goes against everything that I've seen about this. Like, women are more careful and are more negatively impacted by COVID. Just me personally. As a result, the women tell Jackson that, quote, "We used to live this really full life, but fear of going out has truncated our lives so much. I can relate to that. My husband and I used to host big parties, go to concerts, travel on a whim, and now we can't do those things without seriously considering our risk of getting COVID. I mourn the life we used to have, and I know he does too." You should be more creative. You can travel, just rent a car and go like to a nature place where there aren't a lot of people. Don't go to Tokyo. It's like, it's the sheer lack of imagination. You could be doing other stuff. You can still have good dates. You can still even go to concerts, like wear an N95 and go to an outdoor concert. Like you could still hypothetically do it. Just be safe. Boring, 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 boring. You're like, ooh, I want to go to parties and concerts and travel. Like, it's just not creative. It's very normie shit to do. Her framing is exclusively about him, quote, fearing infection rather than having an understanding that it is true that he will be very negatively affected by it. And so she's now equating, thank you, yeah, she's equating her feelings of wanting to go out and do stuff with his feeling of fear. But that's like, he's meeting the world as it is. He's being realistic. Cool. Jackson says the main problem area he sees with couples in this situation is their individual assessment of risk. That's actually been one of the biggest points of contention between me and my husband. It's been hard to agree on a set of responsible COVID protections for our household. I don't think it would be terrible, for example, to eat inside a restaurant every once in a while. You're dumb. But he says there's still a possibility we may bring COVID home from our outing, and that scares him. It's a proportionate response to be scared of dying. In these situations, Jackson says compromise is key. The best outcomes in relationships are when partners, quote, with polar extremes of safety move toward the other in a way that is a little bit uncomfortable for both of them. Oh my God, kiss my ass, dude. For me, that might mean being okay with dining al fresco most of the time. What does that mean? Does that mean dining outdoors, or does that mean dining by purchasing food and pick takeout? I don't know what al fresco means. For him, that might mean acquiescing to eating indoors sometimes, maybe during less busy times of the day. You know, okay, I would say that a reasonable compromise here would be eating outdoors. If you want to be seated outdoors at a restaurant, I've done that since the beginning of the pandemic. Al fresco. Okay, yeah, but that's the reasonable compromise. Eating indoors is never a reasonable compromise, in my opinion. At this point, no. Are you kidding me? No. He said, he says, I would call that a good outcome if a couple finds a way to accept some differences and adapt to a new normal. Adapting to a new normal means adapting to the fact that there is a BSL-3 pathogen in the air all the time. All the time. Adjusting to that new normal. I told Jackson that I want to be more supportive and empathetic to my husband's needs. I guess that's a good impulse. But sometimes it is tricky to parse out what is a valid health concern and what might be anxiety. Every health concern about COVID is valid. Like, there is nothing about this disease that's like, actually, it's not as bad as you think it is. Never. Just letting you guys know that these are the people that are going to be responsible for the T virus getting out. Yeah, they're exactly this is exactly the person who hides their zombie bite in the movie. And then they turn suddenly when everybody's in a compromised and small enclosed situation. Kitty Tick says, this lady, my dad has worn a mask during flu season when working to protect my mom for like 15 plus years. I guess he just loves my mom different than some people. During the early waves of COVID before the vaccine, my dad was changing inside the laundry room, putting his scrubs into the washing machine before going to the shower across the hall, refusing to kiss like my mom, all before we even knew how bad it was. The care that goes into it, like that, it's like with allergies. I sometimes see posts on Reddit, and I don't know if they're real, but sometimes I see posts on Reddit that are like, my boyfriend ordered shellfish even though he knows that I'm allergic, or something about peanuts even though he knows that I'm allergic. And it's like, dude, this person is going to get you killed. They do not understand. And then there's like people in the replies who are like, my partner has a mild allergy and I try my hardest to prevent from exposure for them. Like a more mild, like gluten allergy, for example. And they're like, I still try really hard because I know how uncomfortable it is for them, versus like shellfish and peanut allergies, which tend to be lethal. Just, dude, oh man, I cannot imagine having a partner that was that inconsiderate of my health. I'm like, I'm already disabled. I already struggle to work on for myself, even setting my own standards. It's hard for me to reach those standards sometimes, much less work for an employer. And yeah, like, I can't imagine having like someone who is not appreciative of the fact that they could bring home an illness that would prevent me from being able to work at all anymore. Like, I actually want to be able to participate and be productive and earn money. I don't want to be 100% dependent on someone else. I want to be in a mutually dependent relationship, but I don't want to be like 100% dependent on someone. I don't want to be like physics girl whose husband is now her full-time caretaker and she can't get out of bed anymore. It's just not the life I want to live. Like, does this woman realize that if her husband becomes more ill than he already is, she is going to have to make sacrifices in her life in order to just take care of him on a basic level? And then their risk around COVID is going to increase, not decrease. Celeste says, people are ridiculous. I have an acquaintance whose ex-wife would feed him garlic because she, quote, didn't believe he was actually allergic to it. He kept getting sick and couldn't figure out why. That's poison. You're poisoning me on purpose. I've seen ones like that too, where it's like my mother-in-law put something in my food that she knows I'm allergic to because she's like, I don't believe in that. Atreyu says, with dishes, cleaning, sex, and stuff, find middle ground. Like deadly infections, there's no middle ground. It's not even a middle ground between us as a married couple. It's the middle ground between like us and this virus that just will use all of our cells to replicate itself. I can't compromise with a virus. Like, I can't compromise with COVID and say, oh, I rarely eat in restaurants. Surely if I eat in a restaurant at like 4 p.m. when it's not very busy, then I won't get sick, right? You can't bargain with a virus. And yeah, the framing of this, that you're bargaining with your partner, I think is the wrong framing. You're not bargaining with your partner. You are bargaining with a deadly virus. You're saying maybe it might be worth it to risk getting COVID sometimes, but for a lot of people, it's not. Yeah, you're trying to reason with a particle that's only goal is to replicate itself. So she goes on, the reality is that if he gets COVID again, he could get really sick. So some of our efforts to protect our household from the coronavirus are warranted. But there are moments when his measures are unnecessary. For example, when he wears a mask outdoors and no one is around. When I bring it up, he gets defensive. I mean, dude, I've said it before and I've said it again. You know how when you vape and someone blows out a big fat vape cloud and it just kind of hovers in the air? Well, unless it's a windy day, that happens outside too. I mean, I've seen people complain about folks smoking cigarettes near playgrounds at public parks. And it's like, I've always thought to myself, you're outside. There is no way that you're getting a concentrated enough amount of nicotine or tobacco in your lungs to hurt you. Like, if you can smell it a little bit, I understand that being disturbing, but that doesn't mean that it's causing you any kind of actual risk, right? So parents who have bitched in the past, I've had this conversation about people smoking cigarettes anywhere near their children at a public park, even if it's 20 feet away. If the parents can smell it, they're upset by it, But you can't conceptualize that going to a public park where a bunch of people are, if it's not a super windy day, that in the same way that you could smell the tobacco, you would be able to breathe in COVID. Yeah, vaping to visualize COVID risk, a very big brain. Yeah, it's a water vapor thing. It's supposed to settle toward the ground, but it's also mostly aerosolized. So it's just going to hang in the air and then it's going to get sucked into the air conditioner and then it's going to get blasted out again by the air conditioner and not really filtered because most places don't have viral filters. So no, wearing masks outdoors is not unreasonable. Also, if you have allergies and you wear an N95 outdoors, guess what? You're going to have fewer allergy symptoms. There's more than one reason to wear a mask outside. And yeah, of course your husband gets defensive. You're trying to make him take fewer precautions to protect himself. If your husband is wearing a mask outdoors and no one else is around, why do you need to say anything to him about that? It's not preventing you from doing anything. Why don't you shut the hell up? I don't know, man. It's really irritating to me. Yeah, unlike smoke, COVID doesn't have a warning smell. So this is apparently a hard conversation to have with long COVID patients, according to Jackson. Many of them feel like they've been gaslit in the medical community and have had to defend themselves in the context of people not believing that long COVID is real. So approach this topic with care. You don't want to invalidate your partner's emotions or tell them how to feel. This other clinical psychologist says, saying things like you're making a big deal out of this, for example, is not useful. Instead, making sure that it's, quote, science that is contributing to the beliefs that your partner is having around COVID precautions and not other emotions like depression, anxiety, or anger that may be affecting his quality of life. I mean, honestly, it kind of seems to me like you are speaking from a place of maybe depression, maybe you're a little bit depressed that you can't live your life normally and it's causing you to be kind of irrational about what risks are reasonable to take. People just thinking germ theory is fake. True. Okay. I told Jackson that it's not an easy thing to communicate, and he agrees. Sometimes people have a hard time considering something when a spouse brings it up, because it may sound like lecturing or nagging or come with emotional baggage from the relationship. Yeah, that's fair. Sure, that's fair. Busting out the leeches to rebalance my humor is true. A therapist or couples counselor could help, especially one who has experience working with patients who have had long COVID or chronic illness and understands the science and the high stakes. Okay, that's a good recommendation. I'll take that. That person may be able to help my husband, quote, oh no, I don't like this guy. So apparently, according to the guy she's been talking to for advice, the point of getting a therapist or a couples counselor is to get her husband to say, oh, maybe my anxiety is getting tangled up in this. Cool, great. I mean, of course, because her goal is to whittle away at his resolve. So of course, this definitely is a person who's going into couples therapy with the intention of getting her husband to be less careful. It just seems like she's going into it with a particular goal, or at least that this Jackson guy has been suggesting it in that way. Yeah, she's gonna gaslight and eventually kill her husband. Amazing. Sometimes I feel like I'm at an impasse with my husband on this topic, so I don't bother revisiting our restrictive COVID precautions. But Laura Murray, a clinical psychologist somewhere else, says to always keep trying to communicate. If one way doesn't work, try another way. You could be writing a very heartfelt letter. You might say, I love you more than anything. I want our family to do normal things. And I'm worried about you. Worried that your life has become so much about avoiding COVID. Bro, these people are living in a fantasy world. I generally try to avoid calling people delusional because I do think that that is like a clinical term. But this is like delusional. You are not engaging with reality. If you are not willing to engage with the reality that COVID is extremely harmful, and you want to pretend like your partner or whoever in your life who's being safe is being super anxious and I'm so worried that your life is revolved around avoiding COVID. Like, their life would not have to revolve around avoiding COVID if everybody around us would agree that this is a BSL-3 pathogen that we want to avoid catching over and over again. Their relationship clearly isn't meant to last. I don't disagree with that premise. Like, this is one of those things that I don't think that you can compromise on. Like, I genuinely don't think you can. If you want to go eat indoors at restaurants, if you really are that in need of having a servant bring you food, cool. I understand your need to LARP as a rich person. Cool, great. You are disconnected from reality. And I don't know how to have a relationship with that person. And it does damage friendships because living in different realities does negatively impact relationships. Like, yeah, there are people who I would love to see more often who do not behave safely, and so I don't trust them, and it's hard to have the conversation about testing and like wearing masks and stuff because people are treating it like it's irrational to be avoiding this disease, and then like being treated like you who are actually paying attention to the science, who's reading the studies, who's keeping track of the wastewater levels, are the crazy one who can't adapt to reality. Like, it is the most widespread instance of gaslighting that I have personally ever witnessed in my life on this earth. How much of this is just buying into the overriding institutionalized narrative? I mean, yeah, you have to be buying into the broader narrative that COVID is not a big deal in order to think, oh, it's okay to eat inside a restaurant sometimes. You are not living in reality. You are living in a fabricated world that has been created for you, I guess, by the mainstream media, and you're just like totally buying into it. But I'm sorry, that's not what the data says. And I think that it is also that like misplaced trust in institutions like the CDC because people don't realize it's a political organization and not a medical organization. I don't think you have to be in any kind of science to work there per se. Not the admins, for sure. Let's see. A little gratitude goes a long way. We do have strong scientific evidence from couples work that to get people on the same page, you need to have empathy and gratitude for each other. Sure. So for my husband, that might mean telling me something as simple as, I thank you for taking all those precautions for me. I know you're doing it to take care of my needs, and I really appreciate that. And for me, that might mean thanking my husband for overcoming some of his COVID fears so we could go on vacation with our son. Well, yeah, these jokes are why I have to be a hermit. I have an autoimmune disease already. Right. Honestly, I've been to public events recently, indoor public events where many other people are not wearing masks. And you know what I did? I wore my N95, and maybe I'll upgrade. I might even upgrade to the 100s, but right now I have N95s. And sometimes I wear sunglasses or glasses to create that extra pocket of protective air because your eyes are a mucous membrane that you can catch COVID through. Like, yeah, as far as I know, I didn't get sick. I went to a seed fair to get seeds for my garden this year, and there were probably 100 people in a relatively small building, and it was fine. You know, I'm not saying don't live your life. I would say probably don't go on airplanes. And don't take off your mask in order to eat indoors or drink indoors. If you mock my mask, I shall put on a helmet. In Avatar 2009, they have these things that go like this around their whole face. And then they seal around the edge of the face, kind of like that. I want one of those. That's what I want. Thank you. Actually, I do kind of like the fact that people can't see my face when I'm wearing a mask. So maybe I don't want one of those, but still. Just give me one of these so I can breathe on Pandora. Yum. In January, we flew halfway across the world to visit family in Dubai. At first, I thought that the stringent COVID precautions he was taking to protect himself on the airplane were over the top. In addition to wearing an N95 mask for 13 hours, he kept a personal air purifier in his seat at all times. Okay, this woman has... If you bring an air quality tester thing onto an airplane, it's disgusting. But now I can see those actions for what they are. He was doing everything he could to make the trip work. In his way, he wanted to see me happy. Yeah, you asked him to take on an unacceptable amount of risk, and he did everything in his power to reduce that risk. Oh, I guess that's the end of the story. Cool. It's about compromise. That's what the moral of this story is. Let's compromise with a BSL-3 pathogen. That's gonna work. And he died. True. He didn't. That's a joke. I wonder if trains are worse or better than planes with COVID. I don't know how good the air filtration is on trains. I'm sure it would depend on the company. Like which company. It might even depend on which car you're in. You know, maybe the first class car has more recently had the filter changed or something. I'm not sure. But if you're on any public transit, I think that that's a very basic precaution. N95 at the minimum. You could get a higher power respirator. You could get one of those full face masks that cover your eyes as well. You should wear, if you're on an airplane, you should definitely be wearing some kind of goggles or safety glasses at the minimum to try to protect your eyes. And then, yeah, holding an air purifier in your lap, normal. Trains have openable windows and their doors regularly open too. Yeah. The train windows are sealed shut here in the US. Oh man, that's stupid. I guess it depends on how fast they go, whether it would be okay for them to be open. Buses, you can open the windows at least, but I still wouldn't go on a bus. I love my car. I'm sorry. I know that public transit is really important for us as a society. But I'm not going to be a person who regularly takes public transit so long as I have the ability to have a car, because sharing air with you people, no, I'm good. Thanks. I don't want to be in a sardine can petri dish with you all. No. Airplanes actually leak bad and cycle more air than you'd think, but it's not good. Oh, good. Great. Good to know. Atreyu says, and then she caught COVID on the trip and is now in ICU. The end. Yeah, that's not how it happened as far as I know, but she got roasted on Twitter by the disabled community. Her account is still on lock, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, she got torn into. She got her ass torn into. Misanthropy is a survival skill during COVID. No kidding. Sealed spaces like trains and planes have regulations regarding HVAC, number of cycles, air exchange per hour, and HEPA filtration. I'm glad to hear that. I think that those regulations are not good enough to actually result in high enough air quality. Yeah, I don't know how well this marriage is going to work out, because I think if she gets him sick again, I think that he's going to divorce her. I don't know what else you would do. If you were severely immune compromised and you were like, I am taking a shit ton of precautions and my partner is trying to chip away at my boundaries, basically, and then you do actually get sick, man, no thank you. If you're on the same page about relative risk and one of you happens to get sick, I think that's a different situation. I want to also clarify. If they're both trying fairly hard and they're basically on the same page about okay, I need to wear masks in these situations, and I'm trying not to catch it, and I'm not trying to say, well, maybe we can go out to eat sometimes and it won't be whatever, yeah, this relationship is going to end in a divorce or a death. He's doing the most, willing to fly to Dubai to see family, even though she doesn't like him wearing a mask. I hope if she gets him sick with this situation, he does leave her, honestly. Right. The thing that's going to suck about that, though, is for disabled people, okay, we're already disabled, and then our spouse disables us more. How the am I going to support myself? You know, like, how is this guy going to like get a job if he ends up more disabled? This is how disabled people end up trapped in these situations with like parents who keep getting them sick, like parents who aren't attending to their care. And you're already struggling with independence if you are disabled. And then if that person gets you even more sick, like you can't even do the basics that you were doing before. So how are you ever going to get at a place where you can be fully independent? Like there is a major injustice here that I don't even know how to begin to address. Oh, what fun. Much love to my patrons, especially Tiago Nascimento, Mersh Rolvog, Michelle Frattaroli, Amanda B., Wellington Marcus, Michelle Winter, Danielle McDonald, DZXN, Suzanne Maynard, Spooky Heather Sylvia, Jamie Jam, Pasnell Infinity, Nova, Sojo, Elizabeth Bartell, Ella V. Nobody, Kevin Young, Sarah A., Athiet, Celeste, Desi Quiche, Liam Hodgson, and Mr. Atheist.